Have you ever considered yourself a supporter of animal rights? Have you ever felt conflicted over how you use animals or consume animal products? If so, then you might be one of many people who've accidentally misunderstood what it means to be a supporter of animal rights. But I love animals so much. Yes, I'm sure you do, but the way in which you relate and interact with animals may fall more under the umbrella of what we label animal welfare than animal rights. In this video, I'll be exploring what the difference is between animal rights and animal welfare, where it gets complicated, where they overlap, and just how on earth we can apply this to the decisions we make every day regarding our use of animals. Hello and welcome to this episode of Emma's Deep Dives, the channel where I, with your help, change the narrative on what we understand about animal welfare and the impact that it has on the thoughts, feelings and decisions we make every day. For those of you who are new, my name is Emma and I've specialised in animal welfare science, conducted research on bottlenose dolphins and have direct industry experience across marine mammal facilities. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic because it's been going around in my head for ages, but is essentially a discussion about the ethical and philosophical conflict that humans have over animals. And as I was brushing up on my reading for it, I forgot how extremely complicated it really is. For that reason, I'm going to try and keep it simple, but moreover, I want to try and keep it focused on how we can use this discussion to question our own reasons and justifications for how and why we choose to use or don't use animals in our everyday lives and how it makes us feel. I think to start this off, we need to ask the question really, what is animal rights? Animal rights is the theoretical perspective that animals have rights in a similar way to humans. Not the same, but similar. We as humans have a right to life, freedom, integrity, to live free from pain and suffering, and to not be used and abused by others. The animal rights position believes that animals should be extended the same rights because, like us, they are capable of experiencing pain and suffering. This leads us to what we call moral consideration or moral status. Human beings are sentient animals, meaning that we can experience and process the world around us. History and philosophy has dictated that it is this sentience that gives us this moral status. And because we are capable of experiencing pain and suffering, it is considered morally unjust to then cause pain and suffering to other people. Scientific understanding of animal behaviour and psychology has significantly advanced since these moral boundaries had initially been drawn by the likes of Descartes. We now know that almost all other animals have the capacity for sentience as well. Therefore, animals may also be considered to have this moral status. Hence, the animal rights position maintains that it is therefore morally unjust to inflict the same kind of suffering onto animals. By extension, it means that owning and using animals for our benefit violates an animal's rights and therefore should just not be condoned. Someone who embodies these principles and is able to conscientiously apply this to their everyday life would be a supporter of animal rights. And prioritising the needs of human rights over animal rights is also known as speciesism. In principle, I think many of us as individuals could really get on board with the sentiments of animal rights, and many do, and it acts like a lens through which they then make their daily decisions, such as eating a vegan diet, not wearing animal products or products that have been tested on animals, choosing not to visit zoos, or even choosing not to own a pet perhaps. However, this all gets rather more complicated when you consider the fundamentally flawed nature of human beings when we operate as a society. We have a notoriously bad reputation for violating our own rights. And unfortunately, we still live in a world where we're not all equal as humans. Many people are still fighting for justice, for their own rights and their safety every day. And it might be hard for some of us to understand that until those who are oppressed feel safe and free from persecution and poverty, they may struggle to prioritise the rights of animals. There are other reasons why an animal rights perspective becomes quite impractical when you consider how society works beyond us as just individuals. The Western historical belief was that humans are superior to animals because of our ability to experience consciousness, conscious thought, thinking, language, which in turn gave us this sense of divine permission to use animals as we please. I'll go into this history in another video because I find it really interesting how 17th century philosophy has shaped how we view ourselves as humans, and in turn how that's shaped how and why we study animals. So yeah, I'm going to do that in another video. Unfortunately, that also does mean that there are a lot of people today who simply just don't care about animal welfare at all, or put it too far down their list of priorities. All too often we see people who prioritise maximising profits or cutting costs in spite of the longer term financial benefits in prioritising animal welfare. Human societies are also inherently selfish and self-serving. In order to survive, they do have to be organised, and this manifests itself as governance. And a government's duty of care to its nation is to at least ensure that it is capable of feeding its citizens. As it stands, we are currently locked into having to use animals to feed our human population, as well as the pets that we own as well. Animals are therefore considered an economic commodity, and it would be foolish to abolish animal farming outright because of how it could destabilise our national food security. Am I saying that using animals in this way is right or morally justified? Not necessarily, but in the grand scheme of things, should we as individuals feel guilty for where previous generations have led us to our current circumstances in society today? I don't believe so. Should the concept of using, owning or influencing animals in their habitats be considered a moral issue at all, since it's such an obvious byproduct of the evolution of human society? I think it should. Although we can't change where we've come from, what we can do is change where we go moving forward. And if we're going to look at this whole thing from an ethical standpoint, then I believe at the very least we have a moral duty to ensure the planet that we live on is at least inhabitable for future generations of humans. But seeing as so many of us also care so much about animals, it only feels right to extend this to protecting other species and the wider natural world. For me, and I'm sure many of you may agree, it starts with sustainable agriculture. Below, I've linked to some excellent resources and reports in the description, and these go into more of the depth about the current state of world agriculture and the future ways forward for sustainability. If we don't consider this as a moral issue, we could just carry on the way we have been and, completely exhaust the planet's resources, farm every bit of land we can until it dries up. We could allow all species which can't adapt to become extinct through habitat loss, poaching, hunting, overfishing, deforestation, and just let other people's grandchildren worry about how they'll survive. Yeah. So having considered how deeply flawed humanity is, and how it is so at odds with applying the principles of animal rights on a societal level, we're then left with having to consider what kind of compromises we must make in order to function as a society within these flawed foundations. We must strike the balance of what is feasible to achieve whilst attempting to minimise or eliminate animal pain and suffering, and preferably to provide opportunities for animals to also experience a good life with as many of those rights as possible. That is what animal welfare is. It's the middle road between animal-human utopia and animal-human dystopia. It's a realistic solution to where we find ourselves today. Once people understand that what they actually really care about is supporting animal welfare, it suddenly makes a lot more sense and generally helps to engage and guide people more in what kind of decisions they feel empowered to make based on what they value, and then how they can adapt these decisions to best suit their current circumstances. Well then, what does animal welfare do? It presents itself with many questions, and the career of someone working in animal welfare, it will be mostly spent weighing up these compromises. That is why we have the field of animal welfare science, to help us ask questions about animals that inform us on how to best take care of them beyond veterinary medicine. It provides data and evidence on how animals behave, how their brains and bodies work, and gives us insight into animals' mental and emotional health and how they cope under human care. If the data tells us that certain situations or conditions don't allow an animal to be free from pain or suffering or to experience a good quality of life, then that can dictate our actions, law and policy, rather than making emotionally driven decisions based on what we feel is the morally right thing to do. Understanding animal welfare can also help guide us as individuals and as consumers to make everyday decisions that feel in line with our values in wanting to protect and care for animals. Okay, so under what circumstances can animal rights and animal welfare actually overlap? One big example includes intensive farming practices, whether that's for food, something like fur, or even for pets, so these kind of puppy mills, mass deforestation for agricultural purposes, poaching and wildlife trafficking, cosmetics testing on animals, any type of thing like animal fighting, cruel animal sports like baiting, or fox hunting, or bullfighting, circuses, poorly managed zoos, or anything that involves poor management of animals generally. Those are kind of the initial ones that I can think of. If you can think of any others, please let me know. For these particular examples, many people from both animal welfare and animal rights camps might agree that certain practices need to be banned outright, but the reasons why stem from different places. For both, it's because these examples cause unnecessary suffering and exploitation of animals for our benefit. For animal rights, it's down to the fact that humans are using animals for these purposes in the first place. But for animal welfare, it's because under no circumstances do these situations demonstrate fair and reasonable use of animals that avoid unnecessary harm and that outweighs any benefit that we might actually get from them. You also don't get any good scientific understanding from these examples other than to suggest that they are harmful to animals and serve very little purpose. Do you ever see anyone investigating the merits of fox hunting and how that's beneficial for either animal involved? Not really, do you? Just an example. I'm sure there are others. If you are someone who bases their decisions purely on the values of animal rights, then that is absolutely fine. But just understand that that's what you're doing. After all, what makes the difference between animal rights and welfare is that one is purely an ethical standpoint, most often guided by emotion and people's intrinsic values, making it much more rigid, and the other is a combination of ethical principles guided by data and is more flexible, but it can be prone to compromise that can end up not being in the animal's best interests. But to function as a caring society that aims to protect animals in a wide variety of situations, such as in farming, zoos, laboratory research, working animals, companion animals, and wild animals, we do need animal welfare science to help inform and guide the best decisions to make for the animals who can't speak for themselves, and that without our intervention face unnecessary exploitation and extinction. And whether or not you choose to support animal welfare, animal rights, or none of these is ultimately your decision to make. As long as you're not breaking the law, technically none of us are objectively right, no matter how much any of us might believe that we are. So after all that, where do you feel you sit on the spectrum of animal welfare to animal rights? If you've had a moment of self-reflection on anything I've said, please comment below because I really want to hear your thoughts. These are only my opinions, and I really appreciate that there are so many different perspectives and each of us has our own reasons for acting the way that we do. If you've enjoyed delving into these different perspectives, then consider subscribing and stay tuned for the next Emma's Deep Dives. Thanks for watching.